Hey guys, welcome to this episode of the Design Your Physician Life podcast brought to you by our Maxillary Mastermind. We actually have just very shortly, very soon, less than 2 months, we have another cohort starting. You don't want to miss it. Go and visit our website, maxillary.com. Today we have an amazing guest. Her name is Dr. Devon Gimble, and we're going to be talking about how you can leverage your expenses as assets. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to the Design Your Physician Life podcast, where you will get excited about being a physician, learn the tools that can help boost your success, and great tips from successful doctors. Join us to unlock the keys to an amazing physician life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Myrdalis Diaz-Ramirez.
Hey guys, welcome to this episode. Today we have an amazing and exciting episode. I hope you like it as much as I know you will. We have Dr. Devon Gimble. She's a retired physician. She's both trained and double boarded as a dermatopathologist. And now she's retired from that to coach high-income professionals, entrepreneurs, and business owners on how to leverage their expenses into creating a lot of miles so that they can travel and enjoy the world. She actually has a new podcast called PointMeToFirstClass and a Facebook group with the same name. Thank you for being here. Welcome. How are you today?
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here. I can't wait to talk to you and just to have a great conversation today.
That's great. So I met you because I'm part of your group. Physicians through physicians, we go through Facebook, and that's really a wonderful way that I've seen better than ever that physicians have an opportunity to connect with each other. But before creating these groups and everything, you were a dermatopathologist. And before that, you were somebody that at some point thought about becoming a physician. Who was that? Was that a little Devon or teen Devon?
It was
that?
Very, very little Devon. I think I am your very sort of typical, only ever wanted to be a doctor when I grew up kind of child. Like I cannot remember having any other career aspiration my entire life, which is a little bit unusual because I do not come from a medical family. So I know there are some people where that made sense to them because that was what they were exposed to growing up. You know, they've got this wonderful history of people in their families, serving in this way and being physicians. And I was the complete opposite. I was raised by a single mom who always did, kind of like clerical type jobs, to put food on the table. And, I didn't have an example of anybody in my family who had done really that kind of pursuit of higher education. And I think it was a mix of just loving a lot of the subject matter that medicine pertains to. I always loved science. I loved, learning about specifically, biology and the body and how it works. And I also had just a really strong belief that I think we are all put on this planet to serve in one way or the other. And that service can look different for everybody. But to me, medicine was that perfect combination of just my inherent interest, and what I like to learn about and just the obvious opportunity to serve, right? And to help alleviate suffering. And so the entire time I was growing up, that was always the singular educational focus, I'm not saying this is a good thing, but I can remember being stressed out about grades, when I was like 10, like nothing, like grades don't matter.
Were you healing your dolls at 10? Were you healing your dolls, taking care of the skin of your dolls or anybody else? Or your mom looking at her, you have this little thing on your skin. Let's see what it is to heal it.
I was not a doll playing child whatsoever. I was much more the just head in a book. I grew up, as I'm sure you did too, in the pre-digital age, right? Like we did not have a computer in our home pretty much my entire childhood. There was no such thing as the internet, but we had books, we had magazines. I remember, as a child growing up, we had an encyclopedia set, right? And some people listening to this may have no idea what that actually is, but I have a feeling a lot of your audience, if they're our age, sort of in your 40s-ish, you do remember that pre-digital age. And I remember coming home from school, and if I was interested in learning about a thing, right? Like I heard about a word, I heard about an animal, I heard about a place, I would go and pull out that volume of the encyclopedia and I would read it because it was interesting to me. So I was definitely the kid where, I just couldn't learn enough. I just had a love of learning and learning about, specifically people and how people work, and not just, the biology of how people work, but I've always been fascinated by just human culture and the way that different people understand things or experience things differently, around the world. And that had always informed my educational path. Even in undergrad, when I went to university, again, I knew I wanted to apply to medical school, but I studied a tremendous amount of history and anthropology because to me, that was the story of people, right? Like medicine is the science of people, how their bodies work and sometimes don't work. But I always was interested in people as a whole. How does the way that you were raised, the way you experience your life, how does that impact your experience of health and wellness and disease when there is disease? So I always just had this just tremendous interest in human beings and the way that they function and they worked.
I have chills right now because talking about encyclopedias, and we're going to be talking right now today about the love of travel. Encyclopedias were my inspiration for traveling.
Yeah.
Looking at those beautiful pictures and having that magazine from National Geographic. We were subscribed to National Geographic and seeing all these magical places. And then we had this encyclopedia, which was The World of Children or something like that.
Yeah.
It was in Spanish. And it had this picture of Mont Saint-Michel in France. And I'm from Puerto Rico. So, Caribbean, France, different things.
Yeah.
And always dreaming about going to that magical place. And one day I was able to go to that magical place and take my mom. And to me, that was like the ultimate, this is like graduating encyclopedia to the ultimate level when you are inspired by something and then you finally are able to do it. And that was the translation for me.
Yeah. And I love that you made that reference because I was also the kid with the National Geographic. Again, we did not have a lot of financial resources growing up. So my family was not the one that was jetting off, and taking airplane trips anywhere, in the US or internationally or anything. And I think that was part of my love of learning, right? Is you can still escape to all these different places. You can still explore even from your own home. And I remember getting the National Geographic magazine in the mail. Again, one of my loves of the pre-digital age is actually having a physical, tangible magazine. You can hold it in your hands and flip the pages. And of course, all the photography is beautiful. And I remember I would read in my closet, at night because everyone else had the lights off in the house. And so I'd have a little flashlight and I'd be sitting in my closet reading National Geographic magazines. And I have a similar kind of like visual memory burned into my brain, which is I remember looking at a spread in National Geographic magazine, and it was specifically it was a photographic essay of the Okavango Delta in Botswana. And it was all of these just stunning aerial photos. And I remember at that time having this sort of conflicted experience on the one hand of, looking at just the absolute beauty of that picture and knowing this is what our world is, right? Like our world holds places that look so different from what my reality was, which was suburban Southern California, concrete jungle. And at the same time, like being so inspired by that and just feeling this visceral pull, to want to go out and be in the world. And at the time, not knowing if that was ever going to be possible for me, right? So it's like seeing what the world had to offer and wondering, am I ever going to have the chance, to move beyond just looking at pictures of this and being able to walk in these places, right? Or to be in these environments. And I think that is something, those pulls, that I think we all have those as kids, as adults, those speak, I think, to our true passions in life, the things that we feel like we cannot get enough of. And for me, that was travel, literally years before I ever had the experience of what I would consider truly traveling. It's like, I knew that was a part of just my desire, my pull to connect, with other humans on Earth. And so I love hearing your story about how you were looking at the same magazines growing up, because I think those are the things that those points of commonality, right? Where we can relate so much to each other as human beings.
There was also this TV program, Big Blue Marble. I don't know if you remember that TV program. And then they would have people and kids from all over the world. So then thinking about cultures and places and how they live, this was like, oh my goodness, I want to go and I want to learn how they live. And those were the beginnings of the traveling, and our family also coming from humble beginnings, but always having a desire for us to know and learn other things. I remember my father bringing the different encyclopedias, getting us the magazine, and then finally taking us to see the world that we saw with them. It was amazing. So your love of traveling was maybe born a little bit inside a closet with a flashlight, right?
Is in a small dark closet in Southern California in the 1980s and 90s.
And then you eventually went to medical school and were inspired to become a dermatopathologist. Why did you become a dermatopathologist?
Oh, yeah. I had no clue going into medical school what just the broad field of pathology was, that it existed, what you even did if you were a pathologist. Certainly not any clue about the very subspecialized area of dermatopathology that I ended up going into. And, speaking about how I had basically always, wanted to be a doctor growing up, I think I had those examples that I think we can all relate to of, very patient facing, physicians. I remember watching ER, growing up. That was such a big show. And thinking about how I think every kid who watched ER had some dream of becoming an emergency room physician, because it just looked so, glamorous and exciting. And that was, to me, real medicine, right? Like getting your hands in there and helping people. And so I went into medical school really assuming I was going to go into one of these very traditional, physician paths, internal medicine, surgery, pediatrics, emergency medicine. And it was a little bit challenging for me because when I was in medical school, I really loved those first 2 years, which were the very traditional classroom-based, medical education where you learned all the things, right? You memorized all the things, took the tests. I liked that. That type of learning actually suits me really, really well. That love of give me information so I can understand how something works. And then in the third and fourth years, when then, you go out into finally, the clinics and the hospitals, and you start being exposed to all these different fields, I was the person who loved learning about everything, but I didn't like any of my rotations. I mean, there were elements of them certainly that I did like, but I never had an experience on a rotation that I saw so many of my classmates having of, oh, this is where I belong. When you meet your friends who know that surgery is the right field for them, I remember their experiences on surgery, and that wasn't mine. And when you meet the person, my husband was actually a medical school classmate of mine, and we were rotating, doing all our rotations at the same time. And I remember he did his psychiatry rotation and he fell in love with it. Like it was something that just made sense to him. It was a place where he felt like there was such a need. The patient population there, he was able to really, really connect with. And he's now a psychiatrist, and he's a phenomenal psychiatrist. And I went through the same exact rotation. We both rotated at the same county hospital. And I was like, this is not my place. I mean, clearly the people who are pulled to certain fields, I think that's amazing. I love that people do have that experience, and I didn't. And I was going all the way through third year, every single retired rotation thinking, oh, there are elements of this that are interesting. And I love the learning, but I don't know if this is the thing for me for potentially, 20, 30 or more years. And we were getting to the end of our third year, and, my now husband, who again, he was my partner at the time, but he was kind of watching me go through like, nope, don't know what I'm going to do. And he had been on, I think he was on his OBGYN rotation. He was in the OR as the rotating medical student. And at one point, I think it was a hysterectomy surgery. And, the surgeon had, after the, uterus had been removed and was placed in, the beautiful little white pathology specimen bucket, had turned to him as a student and said, take this down to pathology. And he was like, great. He hated the OR. So he was like, wonderful. I am out of here. So he takes a specimen down to pathology, and he came home at the end of the night and he said, listen, I don't know if this is going to be something you're interested in or you would like, but have you ever thought about pathology? He's like, I took the bucket down there. It was really nice. Everyone was just really, really genuinely nice to me. They were all learning together and talking. And he was like, and it was really quiet. And I am someone who I like those more quiet, controlled environments. And I knew nothing about pathology because no one, at least in my med school, no one teaches you about the field of pathology, right? They teach you about maybe histology, or they teach you about, pathophysiology. But in my school, we had no exposure to this field. And so I very quickly signed up for a bunch of pathology electives. And I had the benefit of, I trained in medical school in Cleveland, which has a number of really fantastic educational institutions. I went to med school at Case Western. The Cleveland Clinic is right down the road. And as medical students, we were able to do rotations at the clinic if we wanted to. We had a great array of different teaching hospitals that we could do rotations at. And so I had this amazing opportunity to really look at the very, very vast field of pathology. And I did a lot of different rotations. And that was the first time I had the experience of, oh, I think this actually fits me. Like, not just what do I like to learn, but what do I think I actually might want to do, every day? What residency can I imagine myself really putting myself through? Because as we all know, residencies are not a walk in the park. And
I love pathology because they know like everything, right? As a pathologist, you know everything, everything, everything. For me, it's like, I consider like for a little short period of time there doing pathology, but then it was like, oh, I really like to talk to people.
Yeah.
So it was like, that wasn't, but I loved it because you know so much. Is amazing.
Yeah. And I agree. I think for me, one of the reasons that even once I started, learning about pathology, it was actually very difficult for me to say, oh no, this is the thing now, like this is what I'm going to apply for residency. And because of that exact point, here I had been for the last 20 years, imagining myself as a doctor. And in every single one of those scenarios, it was me taking care of patients, right? Whatever the scenario was. And that was a really big consideration for me at that time of, okay, if I choose pathology, of course we have some opportunities to work with patients, but the big difference is it is not patient facing the way that so many traditional medical specialties are. And I really had to figure out, am I going to be okay with that? It feels like a thing that you're giving up. And ultimately for me, obviously the answer was yes, that's okay with me. And one of the things I actually love about being on the side of pathology is the level of conversation that you get to have because the people you're interacting with mostly are other physicians. That was incredible for me. I loved talking about complex medical cases, complex pathology specimens and diagnoses with other physicians because they, of course, much more than you would expect, a non-physician, they have that grounding in medical education. You can have these really nuanced, detailed, fascinating conversations with other physicians that you cannot always have with a non-physician patient. And that was really, really gratifying for me. And one element of pathology that I loved the entire time that I practiced.
So now that you are talking about complex transactions and how to make points here and there, and you're a coach, do you ever see yourself going back and doing some pathology at some point?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So just to kind of catch people up into my timeline, I finished my fellowship training in 2012 and I joined a private practice where I practiced exclusively my area of subspecialty. So the only thing I ever practiced outside of training was specifically skin pathology, dermatopathology. And I did that for 7 years. And then I transitioned out of that practice in 2019, and I've not practiced medicine clinically since then. So it's been a number of years since I've been behind the microscope and really doing that type of work. And when I first transitioned out of medicine, if you had asked me that question, my answer would have been, I have no idea. I'm leaving the door open. I don't know where my path is going to take me. I could very easily come back into medicine in some sort of, way, shape, or form. And now that I've been away from the microscope for, 3.5, almost 4 years, I think honestly, my answer to that is no. I think once I've been away for this long, I've maintained all of my accreditations and my board certifications, but I've not been doing the day-to-day work. And I really think after a certain amount of time, me personally, I think I've lost some of that skill. And I love what I'm doing now so much. It's so hard for me to think about putting some piece of that down in order to go back into a more traditional medical practice. So, never say never. No one can tell the future. But I think at this point, I don't think that my future professional path really involves a lot more practice of clinical medicine, actually.
Tell us about the transition into coaching, specifically for this topic. Like, my goodness, you were behind a microscope, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you were doing some traveling and you were using your credit cards.
Yeah.
So how did you start learning about that process of using the credit cards? Was there somebody who taught you? Was there who was your mentor about that?
Yes.
And
it's a great question. So I started getting into this whole world of learning how to leverage credit cards to earn points and miles, and then to use those points and miles to travel around the world, just either more trips or a different class of service that I never would have wanted to pay cash for, like an international business class trip. I started learning how to do that probably about 3 years into my attending job. So I was a couple of years out of training. I was finally in a job that had vacation time, which it felt like you never really had in training. And I really wanted to go out and see the world. And I still was not, I didn't have a huge amount of disposable income to then go and fund those travels. And so my teacher at that time, which is sort of, the modern age equivalent of that encyclopedia that I used to look to, which is just the internet, right? Like we do have this amazing vast resource now. in Google and blogs and all sorts of information you can find online. And even when I was first learning how to do this, which was 8 or 9 years ago now, there were tremendous resources on the internet. And that used to be my break. Like I remember I would go into work and I would work straight for maybe 2 or 3 hours, just boom, 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 doing cases, doing reports. And at some point, you need a little bit of a break. You need a 5-minute break, a 10-minute break to let your brain rest a little bit. And in those little breaks, I would go online and I would just find the resources that were available. Different people were blogging about traveling with points. There were different, personal finance sites where people would kind of talk about this type of credit card that you could use specifically to earn points and miles. And I just started piecing it together for myself. And for a long time, that's all it was. It was me learning a new hobby, which again, kind of married this age-old love of mine of wanting to travel with a big puzzle. To me, credit card points is like solving a puzzle, which I think a lot of physicians are amazing at, right? It's like, how can I learn just a couple of these pieces, put them together, and then the reward at the end of it is going to be a $5,000 flight that I only have to pay $200 for? Like, that's a great puzzle to solve. And so I was just doing this for myself, for my own personal travel for a number of years. And then when I decided to step away from clinical medicine, it wasn't this super linear path. It's not like I finished working in my practice and then the next day decided, oh, I'm going to start a business, or, oh, I'm going to start working with people in this very defined way. It took me a long time, honestly. I mean, we had a pandemic in the meantime, obviously that really started in 2020. I had 2 little kids at home that all of a sudden were not in school at all. And so when I transitioned out of medicine, there was about a year or 2 period where I was just kind of trying to get my feet under me. I was trying to figure out, what is my life now that we're in this pandemic, that, my kids are home from school, that I'm not practicing medicine full time anymore. And so it was a very gradual building up for me. It was just talking to a few more people about what I was doing, friends being interested in, not that I was traveling during the pandemic, but, friends being interested in talking to me about, like, wait a minute, how come you were always going to international conferences and flying the way that you were flying? Are you just paying all this money for it? And I was like, no, absolutely not. And so it was just having conversations with people and then building slowly and organically. And I think that is one thing that was very different for me when I think about entrepreneurship and, starting a business compared to medicine, is that at least my experience of going into medicine is that there's a very linear, predictable path. Like I grew up kind of knowing, oh, okay, if I want to go to medicine, here's the prescription. You go to university, you've got to take the right tests, right? You've got to get into a medical school. Like there's this path that we can all follow. But with medicine and entrepreneurship, I mean, there is zero path. There are no instructions. There is no guidebook. And so I think we all have to create our own different paths. And the way that mine looked was just this very kind of slow, organic growth. It was not like I said, let me leave medicine and let me open up my doors as a business owner, and everything happened overnight. It wasn't like that at all.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you bring that up. That's one of the things we have our effort, which is the Maxillary Mastermind, where we precisely help physicians with that transition, or physicians who have started and they're young in their careers. We help them that because there's nothing like that. And entrepreneurship is something that many people dedicate during the time to learn during the time that we are learning medicine. So
Yeah.
that's and now that you have this, I see that, you seem happy, you seem like you're connecting, you have many things, many ideas. And it seems that despite all the challenges, you're like in your path now as entrepreneur, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I am, and I think whatever your path looks like, right? I think that physicians honestly make fantastic entrepreneurs. And for some people, that's going to look like entrepreneurship within traditional medicine, whether it's starting your own practice, right? Or doing something that's medical adjacent. If you're someone who develops products, or if you're somebody who wants to offer a medical service and have that be part of your entrepreneurship journey. That will be what it looks like for some people. For some people, it will look like what I did, which was, now not practicing clinical medicine at all and really having my entrepreneurship journey be my full-time professional pursuit. And for some people, it's going to be something in between, right? They're going to have their clinical job that they probably still find a lot of fulfillment in, and they want to do something on the side, right? Like not medically related, something related to a passion of theirs or a skill of theirs. And I think that that's really something that's important to acknowledge, that, again, coming back to that idea that our paths don't have to look the same. I think what's important is for us, and this was a piece, honestly, that I feel like I kind of ignored or just looked over for like 20 years. Like I feel like there was the decision to go into medicine and then the 20-year execution of that decision. And then I get to the other end of it, and you kind of look up at some point. I think all of us go through this at some point where you kind of look up and you evaluate and you're like, wait a minute, where am I now? How exactly did I get here? And is this what I want it to look like for the next 20 or 30 years? And I think that evaluation is important. And for me, I think I had gotten to a point in my experience in medicine where I looked around and I was like, wait a minute, this isn't working for me anymore, right? It doesn't mean that the last 20 or 30 years were a waste. It doesn't mean it was a mistake to go into medicine, but it does mean that this isn't working for me anymore. So what am I going to do about that? And I really think that that is the opportunity that entrepreneurship provides. It's for us to be able to answer that question, right? Like, what do I feel called to do now? How do I feel called to serve now? And again, it's not going to look the same for everybody. And I think for me, medicine was such a passion of service for such a long time. It was really important for me. If I wasn't going to be practicing clinical medicine, I needed some expression of service. And this is just what it looks like for me now. This is just the next iteration of how can I take what I know, what I think I might be good at, that other people might be interested in, but either don't have the time or their brains don't work the same as mine. So they're just not as naturally good at it as I am. And how can I share that and provide service to other people? And I especially love doing that for other physicians. I obviously have such a huge place in my heart for people in the medical field. And so being able to continue to working with physicians, but in a very different way than I did, when I was practicing pathology is also just incredibly satisfying for me.
We call that in our mastermind designing your vision. And that's what we start with, because many people don't. And as you have just portrayed right there, you can do this at any point in your life, right? It doesn't matter that you started this career as a physician. You can redefine yourself, and then you learn new things, you learn new skills, and you can define what the next stage of your life is going to be. It doesn't mean that because you're a physician, you have to just be in that little box forever and suffer whatever transitions we've had in medicine forever. There's many things that you can do and still decide to be or not, or to continue to be or not a physician. So that's perfect example of how you redefine your vision. I want to go to the first time that you realized that you had really used your credit cards for an amazing trip in an amazing way. The first time, like you said, oh my goodness, I did this and this is awesome. I'm going to repeat it.
Yes, absolutely. So first, before I tell you that, I'm going to tell you the first time I used my points, which was not in an amazing way. And I had no idea at the time. So I had no idea about this whole entire world of, credit cards and specifically earning their points for travel up until, again, about 8 years ago. I actually had a points earning credit card for a number of years prior to that. And so when I was in fellowship, I had actually gotten my own first personal credit card that I ever had as an individual human being. And it happened to be a credit card that earned points. And so between my fellowship year and probably the next 3 years, when I was using the credit card, it was earning points. And finally, my husband and I were ready to take a trip, about 3 years after I'd been holding this card. And the only way that we knew how to use the points at that time, we were like, was the way the credit card company tells you, which is you log onto your credit card account, you pick a flight, and then you offset the cost of the flight using your points. And we thought, oh, this is amazing, right? Like we just saved $2,000 on 2 round trip economy flights. What's better? We took a trip. It was amazing. I loved it. And then I started about a year after that, finding these blogs and thinking, wait a minute, like there's actually a whole different world out here where you can get so much more equivalent value from the same amount of points. And that's when I started actually deliberately earning points and researching the ways where you could get a lot of value out of them. So the first time I used my points, kind of knowing what I was doing, like having a very deliberate idea about, I want to get, an amazing trip out of this.
Smarter way. The
smarter way. Exactly. Not just the sort of like baseline way, which again was still an amazing trip, but that's when I realized, oh, wait a minute. I can actually use fewer points for this second trip than the first one took. And instead of flying economy internationally, I can fly first class, which I did not know this at the time. Because again, I had no experience with luxury travel my entire life. But there are certain international airlines where, in their classes of service, there's not only economy and premium economy and business class. There's actually another class of service, even higher than business class, called first class. Not all airlines have this, but some do. And the very first Great Points trip I took, I remember I was flying, I'm based in the Chicago area, and I had a dermatopathology conference that was being held in Paris that I was going to. And so I was going to fly myself, from Chicago to Paris. And before points, the way I would have booked that flight was whatever's the absolute cheapest flight I can find is what I'm going to take. And I'm going to, that's going to mean traveling in economy, probably with a layover, where I just have to sit in an uncomfortable airport for 4 or 5 hours, whatever. And so I used my points and I traveled first class on Lufthansa airline. It's a German-based airline. And not only was the actual first class experience for me, again, coming from my background, just absolutely mind-blowing. I think my out-of-pocket expense for that flight at that time was less than $100. So it's like, not only am I getting the deal of the century, but I'm actually being able to fly first class. And then this is what really knocked my socks off, is that Lufthansa Airlines, they have, since they're based in Germany, the main hub for them is in Frankfurt. And at Frankfurt Airport, they actually have a separate terminal for people flying first class. So what that means is that when you're traveling with them, you can get off the airplane, you walk through, the main airport terminal, you can exit the terminal, you walk just like a block down the street, and you can have entrance into an entire terminal building that is only for people flying, first class on this airline. And it is, it's basically like, a 5-star hotel service. Like they have plated dinners that you can have in their, lounge. They have, shower rooms, bathtub, huge bathtubs. You can just, take a bath in or do whatever, like get clean in between your long haul flights. It's so quiet. That's a huge plus for me. I'm a sensory sensitive.
We know now from your days of pathology.
I know, like this is where my pathology
with
colors
the
are
closet,
really shining. I know. I'm like, I want someplace it's quiet. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have a lot of like flashing lights or a lot of noise, and amazing food, amazing service. So they do all the passport control there. So you don't have to go through, a separate customs, immigration, just TSA security type check. When you check in with your passport, they do all that for you. And then when it's time for your connecting flight, because I'd flown, from Chicago to Frankfurt and then connected over to Paris. When it's time for your connecting flight, someone approaches you in the lounge and they say, "Oh, your car is waiting for you." And you go down a little elevator and there's like a luxury vehicle at the bottom of the elevator that you get on, and it drives you on the tarmac to your flight. And they just deposit you there. So everyone else boards the flight. And then, right when they're about to close the doors, they come and get you in the car and they deposit you in front of your flight, and you climb up the stairs and sit down. They literally close, the airplane door, and then you're off to Paris. And it was that experience. Not only having an absolutely incredible, whatever it is, 9-hour flight where I got great food, I could actually lift up my legs, on an airplane flight for the first time in my life. You can actually sleep. That's amazing. But then that whole ground experience, it just completely blew my mind. It's like, I cannot believe that this is actually possible. Again, for an out-of-pocket cost of what would be way less than what I would even pay on an economy ticket. And that was the first time I was like, wait a minute, this is real. Like, this is a real thing. I can figure out how to do it. And I can do this again and again and again. And I actually, since that time, that must have been, 5 or 6, 7 years ago, over 7 years ago at this point, actually, I have never since then flown internationally in economy class. I've only ever flown business or first, and it's only because of points. And I have to say, that experience, especially as you get older, your bones, your joints start hurting a little bit more. It's not as easy for my body to adjust to time changes like it once was. Being able to fly in that way, one, it's just a really fun experience. And two, it's just such an easier experience, like on you physically. It makes now travel is part of the fun for me. It used to be, oh my gosh, like, let me just close my eyes and hold my breath. And then when I get to my destination, then it will be amazing. And points has made it so that the actual traveling part of getting to my destination is as much fun as the actual travel is itself. And that's been just a really, really fun surprise for me. And then my family, as I've started to take them on some of these adventures as well.
To me, the magic I see in your story, about, despite the magical experience that you had, is that I don't think you were a business owner at that time, 5 to 7 years ago.
No.
Nor was your husband. Is that correct?
No, he wasn't. That's
so you
correct.
were employees.
Yeah.
You were using your miles, your normal credit card miles. Yeah. So any particular tips right there for the people who don't have a business yet?
Yes.
So let's talk about the level of people who are not having a business.
And this is where I think physicians are in such an amazing position, because even like where I was right out of training, right? I wasn't spending. I didn't feel like I had a lot of disposable income. I was not buying a lot of, luxurious things at that time. We all have expenses, all of us, right? The whole point of credit card points is that you can leverage those expenses, those things you have to buy anyway, your groceries, however you get yourself around transportation wise, right? Like whatever it is that you have to pay money for in order to run your life, you can use a credit card for those expenses. Again, with the caveat of being very responsible with that credit card use, not spending money that you would never have spent anyway and paying off all of your bills, on time. But you can use those expenses to earn credit card points. And this is my own personal experience, being a physician, being part of a dual physician family, knowing a lot of physicians, regardless of your specialty, right? Whether you're in a quote unquote low paying specialty or a quote unquote high paying specialty, my experience is that physicians and physician families all tend to have reasonably high expenses. It's just the nature of the way that we live. It doesn't mean that you're frivolous. It doesn't mean that you're buying, again, a lot of luxurious things. It means it costs money for us to run our lives. And my philosophy is let's leverage that expense, that money we have to spend anyway to run our lives, and earn some points so that if you're someone like me who does love to travel, great, you're going to be able to use those points as a form of currency so you don't have to spend thousands of dollars a year to still be able to travel and explore and have these types of experiences. And so any physician, honestly, can do this. There are so many of us where you don't need to have 100 different credit cards. You can start with one or two very solid points earning credit cards. And any of those expenses that you can use a credit card to pay for, just start using the credit card for those expenses. You can start slow and start small. And as you get used to how this whole world works, then you can decide if you want to get more creative or more complicated with your plan. But you can really start this with one or two great cards and get tremendous value out of it.
Which unusual expenses people don't expect they can pay with a credit card and they're missing on?
Okay. So an unusual expense, this is something actually that I didn't even really know how to do until this year. I never thought about it. I wasn't aware about it. So this will not apply to everyone. But if it does apply to you, it can be a way to earn thousands and thousands of credit card points, which is there are some 529 plans, which are, educational investment plans that people may set up either for your children, if you have grandchildren, or if you just have someone else in your life whose educational expenses, you want to help support. And so you have a 529 plan open for them. There are some state-specific 529 plans that you can actually use your credit card to contribute to. And when you do that, you can earn credit card points for that. My kids' 529 plans, I have two kids, they each have their own 529 plan. We have our plans through Utah, even though we are not Utah residents. And we can make our 529 contributions using a credit card. So when you think about, for those of you, especially if you are contributing hundreds, thousands of dollars every single year to a 529 plan or more than one 529 plan, it can be a very easy way to earn thousands and thousands of credit card points. And that goes in that category of not the first thing that you would think of in terms of using your credit card to be able to earn points. That has been a real points goldmine for my family. And again, it's not going to apply to everyone. It's not available for every single state educational 529 plan. But if it is available for yours, it is such an easy way to earn so many points.
And what if you don't have a child or you don't have a state that approves that?
Yeah, if you don't have a child and you have no intention of, contributing to a 529 plan anyway, so that would probably not be then an option for you. Another option that I think does apply to a lot of us, which again, isn't going to be perfect for everyone, but is a way that you can earn credit card points, is that this is very timely. We're coming up to that point in the year, that lovely tax time that most of us get to grapple with. You can actually pay your taxes using a credit card. And for those of us, again, if you are a business owner, if you have quarterly estimated taxes, you may have a lot of taxes that you pay a year. But even when, my husband and I were both initially W-2 employees before he started his own practice a number of years ago, when we only had this sort of that regular one-time tax filing and tax payment date in April, if you do end up owing taxes, again, it can take some of the sting out of that if you're using a credit card to pay your tax bill so that you can come out on the other end having earned hundreds or thousands of credit card points that you can then turn in to travel. So one caveat with that is that if you want to use a credit card to pay your taxes, you do have to pay a fee to do that. And so it will not be the right choice for everybody. But if you are in this world and interested in learning about how you can get a lot more value out of the points that you earn than the cost of the fee to use your credit card to pay your taxes, trust me when I say you can come out way, way ahead in terms of the value you can get from those points, even if you do have to pay a fee to pay your taxes with a credit card.
Are there any 1 or 2 tips you can give us that you used that were different for that first trip that you did? It wasn't perfect at the time, as you said, but it took you to the wonderful, magical experience of the first class that day, which was a shift from just, buying your tickets directly with the points for the economy class.
Yes.
What 1 or 2 tips did you use for that first trip?
Yeah. So here's my number 1 tip. And this is literally the difference between my very first points trip, where we spent, again, I think we spent like 250,000 points to get 2 round trip economy class tickets. So we saved about $2,500 from 250,000 points. This is the difference between that and then my second trip, where I used less than 200,000 points total to get a first class ticket that normally prices out at $9,000 or $10,000. So this is the difference in getting tons more value out of your points. Is don't use your credit card points through your credit card company. So if you have credit cards within the Chase company where you're earning Chase Ultimate Rewards points, or you have American Express credit cards where you get to earn American Express points with them, when you go to book your travel, don't book your travel through your actual credit cards travel portal, it's called, because that is what's going to keep you from getting a lot of value out of those points. The number 1 thing that you need to learn how to do if you want to get tons of value out of your credit card points is learn how to leverage the airline transfer partners of your credit card. And all that means is that each of these main credit cards have a menu of airlines that they partner with. You can move your credit card points out of your credit card account and into a frequent flyer account with one of these airlines, like United Airlines, for example, which is what I did. So I moved my Chase points out of Chase. I moved it into my United Airlines frequent flyer account. And then I booked my Lufthansa flight through United Airlines. And that's what allowed me to get then a $9,000, $10,000 flight for less than 200,000 points instead of needing 900,000 or 1 million Chase points in order to book the same exact flight. So that's always my number 1 tip for people, is that if you are not leveraging the transfer partners of your credit card, you are leaving tons and tons of potential value on the table. And I actually just like to leave it at that, because usually that tip alone is enough for people who already maybe have some points earning cards to really kind of think about and reevaluate, oh, wait a minute, maybe this is something that I need to learn about a little bit more so that I can be sure to get a ton of value out of my cards. And so I like to tell everyone that is the very, very first place to start.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Let's talk about, so that was your life without being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Now you're an entrepreneur. So for those physicians who have either they own their office, or they have a different business or stuff like that, there's an upgrade in this card world, right?
Yes.
So tell us about that.
Yes. So the first time I actually realized this is a little bit before my husband went out and started his practice, because the practice that I joined out of training, it was a small physician-owned practice. And so there were 4 physician partners, they owned the practice, and the rest of us, there were 8 physicians total in the group. We would have, monthly meetings where we would talk about, sort of the finances of the practice. Where is money going? Is there anything that we could spend, less money on for the same quality of service or better? And so even though I was not an entrepreneur, I was not a business owner, it was an amazing experience to be part of a physician-owned practice, to get that kind of behind the scenes look. And it was very obvious to me very quickly, this practice is spending a ton of money. And not that it's spending it poorly, it's that, it takes a lot of money to run a practice. We had an independent pathology laboratory. So you're thinking about things like all of the machines that we need to use to process biopsies, to process specimens, all the reagents, those things that you have to replace every single week or every single month, all of the equipment in that office, right? Everything in the lab that was required for us to do very, very high quality work, all of the courier services. We had to pay courier services to drive all around Chicagoland to pick up biopsies from, 100 different physician offices. We had a lot of shipping costs, shipping supplies. It became very obvious to me very quickly, this practice spends a ton of money in order to run. And so when I was starting to learn about all of these concepts on the personal side, right, and just applying it to like my grocery bill and my utility bill, it was very obvious to me that if you're in a position where you run a business and that business has expenses, you are sitting on top of a gold mine. And I remember sitting in those meetings and thinking, this practice could be earning, without breaking a sweat, literally millions and millions of points every single year. And they're not, because that was not their interest. But that drove me crazy, because to me, it was an untapped opportunity. So then when my husband decided he wanted to become self-employed, he's a psychiatrist, like I mentioned. Psychiatry offices have much lower overhead than many, many other physician types of offices, right? He doesn't need to purchase vaccines for patients. He doesn't need a lot of equipment. He doesn't have fancy lasers, all of these things that a lot of other physician practices have. But at the same time, we fully funded him getting out and getting started on his own by ourselves personally. We didn't take out any business loans. And so again, I saw very quickly, okay, he has office rent. No, he doesn't have a lot of really expensive equipment, but he still needs things to start his office, right? He still needs computers. He still needs furniture in the waiting room. He still has EHR expenses. He still has a lot of business expenses. And coming from my experience of having been in the practice that I was in, but that was not really leveraging credit card points, when he started his practice, I said, we are not going to let any cent of these business expenses go to waste. And so we were very deliberate about getting business points earning credit cards that we could then use specifically for his business expenses. And so this is something that I think all physicians need to know about. And again, you don't need to own your own medical practice. It can be anything, right? You can have a consulting services company. You can do something completely unrelated to medicine in your own business. Maybe you're writing a novel. I mean, it doesn't matter what you're doing, but if you're doing anything entrepreneurial, you should be absolutely looking into what are some great points earning business credit cards so that I can make sure that I'm leveraging those business expenses. Because what I see, again, even personally, is that businesses tend to have far higher expenses than even some of us do on our personal side, especially if you are running a medical practice. And so it can just be the easiest way to get millions and millions of credit card points, and then obviously turn those points into really incredible, valuable travel experiences for yourself or your family.
So if you've done this math, if you have a company, think about if your husband has started this practice and had used a credit card that gives him 2% cash back.
Yeah.
And now you're using, instead of a 2% cash back, you're using one for points.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between the cash points, how much you get?
Oh, there's a huge difference. Yes. And I think this is an area where I love that you asked this question, because this is actually, to me, one of the initial questions that so many people, they don't even ask. I think they make an assumption about, and that's why they never even get into earning credit card points, is because there are some really fantastic cashback credit cards, both on the personal side and the business side. And I think people have this assumption that if I have a really great cashback earning credit card, like you mentioned, at 2%, some are at 2.5%. Maybe there's some categories where it's even higher depending on the cards you have. I think there's an assumption that, oh, there's no way that points are going to give me more value than that cash back. And I think that personally, I think that's absolutely not true. Yes, you have to learn certain things in order to get more value out of your points. But if, again, you're in that realm of having multiple 5-figure business expenses, 6 figures of business expenses or more every single year, if you spend, again, just a little bit of time educating yourself about what are the credit cards that are going to be the best fit for you, you can get exponentially more value out of credit card points than you can a cashback credit card. So again, that's not something that you're going to be able to do just by getting one card and never learning anything about them. But I think it actually doesn't take learning a lot to be able to exceed the value that you can get with a cashback credit card by, again, getting some very, very good points earning credit cards.
So what you just said is that you can get over 2.5% cash value with doing points.
You absolutely can.
Credit card and you're using them appropriately.
Yes.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. So a couple of things. One, what's the ideal balance? Because we know some people will have so many credit cards, personal side, and so many business side. What's the ideal balance in terms of having these credit cards that will give you, optimize your credit, right? Your credit points as your value, and then also your ability to negotiate. And I know it will depend from card to card and your personal situation, but some people, I see that they open their wallet and they have so many credit cards, right?
I'm that person.
And they use this one for that and that one for that and this one for this type of shopping. Because it in your case right now, that's your business, is coaching and teaching about this. But for somebody who doesn't have the time to really deal
not
with all these
everybody
credit
wants it
cards
to
and
be a full-time
optimize it
job.
like that. Exactly. Because
Yeah.
it becomes, and then you have, I see people who have like all these Excel spreadsheets with, these cards, and then all these other cards are marked this way. So let's talk about like people who want to optimize this
Yeah.
opportunity, but they might not have all
Yeah.
the time to really go all the way through.
Yeah. And I think this is a fantastic question because I really think it speaks to, again, another sort of like presupposed barrier that people have to getting into just this world in general. And I think there's this assumption, exactly like you said, well, in order to do this quote unquote right or to do it well, it's going to be a part-time job or it's going to be a full-time job. I'm going to have 25 different cards and I'm going to have to be able to track them all and learn which one I use for what. And for a lot of people, that actually doesn't sound fun, right? Like for me and the way my brain works, that is part of the fun. But I fully acknowledge not everybody wants to do that. But this is where I think physicians or business owners are in such a unique position, is that when you have high expenses, again, either they're personal expenses, business expenses, or both, that is an enormous advantage. Because what that means is that then you don't actually need to have 5, 10, 15, 20 different credit cards in order to be able to earn a decent amount of points. You have the advantage of having the level of your expenses do a lot of that work for you. And so I tell people, especially in the beginning, you never have to get to any point of complexity that you don't want to get to. You literally can start with one great points earning card and get used to using that. Because what happens for most people is if they have one great personal or one great business points earning card, they get used to using that for their expenses. They get used to learning about how to use those points to travel. And oftentimes what will happen is they'll say, oh, that was pretty fun. I like this. And maybe I do want to consider having one more card if it means that I'm going to be able to earn even more points faster, or I'm going to be able to have access to a different menu of transfer partners than my one credit card currently gives me. And that's okay. Again, sort of like I was saying with building my business, I didn't go from, okay, I closed my doors, on a medical practice, and then I just opened up this fully formed other business the next day, right? It was this organic baby steps process. It's the same thing with credit cards. You can get one great one to start with and get used to it. And then if your own curiosity, your own interest in the world grows, trust me, there's a lot more you can do from there, but you don't have to start at that fully formed, super complicated credit card portfolio in order to get value out of credit card points.
So I'm going to choose a credit card. I'm going to choose one personal. I'm going to choose one business that's optimal for me, right? We're not going to ask you which one would be best if Chase Sapphire or Platinum American Express or whatever it is, right? Which are the things that when I'm looking at a credit card, I should look that credit card would be a good one for me?
That's a great question. So here are a couple of things that I look for is number one, just what type of points currency does that credit card earn? Because they're not all going to be the same. Okay. I generally recommend that for people, especially in the beginning, who want to kind of maximize the best of both worlds. I want simplicity, but I also want flexibility, right? I don't want to lock myself in to a points type that isn't actually going to be useful for me. I really recommend that you get one credit card that earns what we call the transferable points. These are the type of points you can move out of your credit card company and into an airline or hotel, frequent flyer, or loyalty account. There's not that many different types of transferable points. There's Chase, there's American Express, there's Citibank, Capital One, and then another one that's called Built, which is actually only on the personal credit card side right now. So I tell people is just pick one of the flexible transferable points currencies. And how do you know which is a good fit for me? Because I do not believe in, there's a best one, there's a right one, there's a good one. It's just like 5 different types of food. It depends on what your flavor, what your personal preference are, what flavor you prefer.
You have allergies. You might have an allergy to American Express. So I don't know, right?
Yeah. I mean, if your best friend loves peanuts and you have a peanut allergy, you're going to be like, that's wonderful for you, but keep those things away from me, right? So with those main transferable types of points, then I usually tell people, okay, find one points earning credit card that's going to allow you to earn a lot of points in the area where you tend to spend a lot of money. Because a lot of these credit cards will offer what are called bonus categories, where if you use a specific credit card for something like groceries, instead of earning 1 point for every dollar you spend, you're going to earn an elevated number of points, 3, 4 points for every dollar you spend. So different credit cards have different bonus categories. Most of us are pretty aware there are some things that we just tend to spend a lot of money on throughout the year compared to other expenses. And so it can be very easy for you to look at where do I just tend to spend a lot of money? Is it on groceries? Is it on travel expenses? Is it on dining out? Certainly during the pandemic, when most of us weren't going anywhere and a lot of us were ordering food to be delivered at our homes, a lot of us had a significant amount of expenses going towards, dining delivery type of services. So you just get a sense of, where do I personally tend to spend a lot of money? Great. Let me get one credit card where that category of expense is a bonus category that's going to allow me to earn a lot of points for that expense. And as I'm getting used to this whole world, I'll use that credit card for everything, but I want to specifically pick a card that, again, is going to help me leverage where my expenses are the highest. And it's the same thing on the business side. For a lot of business owners, if you're an online service provider, if you are a physician owner of a medical practice, a lot of the traditional business cards have bonus categories that don't really apply to us. They will be things like shipping, which again, maybe your business has some shipping costs, but most medical practices, most online-based businesses are not spending the bulk, of their business expenses on shipping. And in that sense, I actually think there are a couple of just great business credit cards that offer you increased points earning for what we just call everything spend. Like, there is no specific bonus category that you're going to benefit from, but there are some cards that enable you to earn more than 1 point for every dollar you spend just on everything. And that's actually a very simple way to approach it from a business perspective is, let me get one great points earning card that offers me 1.5 or 2 points for every single dollar I spend. And I'm going to put all of my business expenses on that one card to begin with.
Does it affect our credit to have so many credit cards? And what are the rules for that?
Yeah, I think great question. So for anybody who actually wants to hear about this in more detail than you and I will talk about today, I actually have on my podcast, which is called PointMeToFirstClass. I think it's the 3rd episode, is literally your credit score and rewards credit cards, where I break down exactly what happens with your credit score when you are interested in applying for more credit cards. But here's the short answer. Number one most important thing, regardless of how many credit cards you have, is that you pay your credit card statements on time. And so do not start getting this type of credit card, especially if you are not in the position or in the habit of paying all your credit card statements in full every single month. Because the number one thing that's going to tank your credit score is your on-time history of payment. Okay. So as long as you're paying your credit card bills, again, for rewards credit cards or points earning credit cards in full every single month, that's actually going to help your credit score. Here's the second piece that helps your credit score that I think is completely counterintuitive to a lot of us who may be just in general, very sort of careful or conservative in terms of your finances. And I think most of us have this assumption that when you compare scenario A and scenario B, one is more responsible. Scenario A is, I have one credit card and I use it for everything. Scenario B is, I have 16 different credit cards that I've applied for.
Yes, that happens. I've
over
seen
the
it.
last 3 years.
I've seen those spans of credit cards in the Facebook
right. And I
group.
think so many of us assume, scenario B, right? Having a bunch of credit cards, especially if you've gotten, 10 or 15 credit cards over the last 3 or 4 years, that is clearly much more financially risky. But that is not actually true. What I've seen time and time again is that if you, again, are in the habit of being very financially responsible with your credit cards, having more credit cards actually helps your credit score. And this is specifically because the second most important contributing factor to what determines your credit score is what is called your credit utilization ratio. And that very simply is, how much of all the credit that's available to you through the different credit cards you hold are you using at any given time? So what happens is, when you only have one credit card, you've one credit line available to you. Even if you're paying off your credit card statement in full every single month, if you use a lot of that credit line every single month, that actually hurts your credit score. So when you have a lot of different credit cards and you are not utilizing a high percentage of that overall amount of credit that's available to you, that is actually really, really strongly positive for your credit score. And so what I saw, honestly, with myself and with a lot of people that I work with is that, again, over time, getting more and more credit cards actually increases someone's credit score, or it stays the same. It doesn't dramatically decrease your credit score. Again, as long as you're understanding the number one most important factor in your credit score is paying on-time payments of your credit card statements. So as long as you're doing that, can actually help your credit score to have a lot of cards, which was so counterintuitive to me when I first learned this. So I was like, that is bonkers. That cannot possibly be true. But again, from personal experience, I will tell you that it very much is true. And if you want to learn about, actually, there's 5 main components that go into affecting your credit score. and how getting credit cards can help some of those components go up or go down, and how you can be really, really mindful of that. Again, I have a whole podcast episode on that. So you can kind of geek out on the details if you're interested by going to my podcast and listening to that episode.
I could be here like all day long. And I think
Me
this
too.
will be the longest episode because it's so awesome. I have one more question and then we'll have space for if you have any bonus or anything that I haven't asked you that, she didn't ask this thing. She should have asked this thing. But one more thing is that every so often we see these offers, right? 100,000, 180,000 points. If you do this, what's the best way to get those offers and use them? I know that in your group, if we join your Facebook group, I know many people there are saying, oh, use my link for this thing because I have this link for this offer. So how do you get those and what's the best way to use them? And, like we could go over and over, but just,
yes,
so exciting.
Yeah, that's a great question. You're talking specifically about, again, this is for people who maybe aren't quite as deep into the credit card points world as certainly I am, or some people who, already kind of have some knowledge of this. But what you're referring to is what's called the sign-on bonus, which is when you initially apply for and get approved for a points earning credit card as an incentive, because these credit card companies want people to apply for their credit cards. They certainly want people like employed professionals, business owners to be using their credit card products. They offer this sign-on bonus as an incentive where you sign on to our card. When you get approved, as long as you spend a specified amount of money in a specified amount of time initially on the card, we're going to give you this huge bonus of points. Like you mentioned, 50, 60, 100,000 or more points when you first sign on for a card. So my number one piece of advice is, especially if you're in the very beginning of learning about how this whole world works, is to actually not have shiny object syndrome, where you see 20 amazing different sign-on offers and you just randomly grab at a bunch of them. That is a very common mistake that people very new to this hobby have, because they have not yet developed the ability to compare these different offers. It's almost like different forms of monetary currency. If I offered you 100,000 US dollars, 100,000 Japanese yen, 100,000 Kenyan shillings, 100,000 Moroccan dirham, right? Where 100,000 is the same. How would you know? Is 100,000 Moroccan dirham? Is that going to get me the same amount of goods and services as 100,000 Japanese yen? You'd have to learn a little bit about those currencies, right? It's the same thing with credit card points. So I see people say, oh, it's 180,000 X points as a sign-on bonus. Yeah, that doesn't actually mean the same thing as maybe 100,000 points from a different type of credit card points or miles. And so I tell people, first of all, don't follow the shiny object syndrome and apply for a bunch of different credit cards just because they have an amazing sign-on bonus until you have a little bit of understanding and knowledge about what are those different points types. Are they even useful, again, for you particularly? And then the second thing is, in terms of actually finding them, how do we know at any given time what a great sign-on bonus for a given credit card is? There's a resource that I actually think is fantastic. It's not mine. I didn't make it. It's another sort of group within the points and credit card miles world that just puts out very, very well-researched, great information. It's a free website. It's called frequentmiler.com. Again, it's another set of points bloggers who I just think are fantastic at what they do. And they have on their website, they actually have a drop-down menu where you can go to that will show you the highest sign-on bonuses for a given credit card at that time point. So you don't have to go around, searching all these different websites or all these different banks to see what they're offering. It's a really great consolidated resource where if you're just wondering, oh, I got mailed an offer, in the mail by my credit card company, is this actually a great offer? I love going to that Frequent Miler resource just to compare it to what they are saying are the best public offers at any given time for credit cards. And so that's a fantastic resource that anybody has access to.
That's wonderful. Any other bonus or just a tip for our physicians who are in this entrepreneurial world about using their credit cards and their points?
Yes. I think the only tip I had, which is really just kind of a reiteration of what we've been talking about this entire time, is if you are somebody specifically who loves to travel, if you're someone who you would take more trips if you could, or you would love to fly somewhere, international, business, or first class, that you just have not yet wanted to spend the cash on doing so. I really, really recommend that if you've never considered this, that you just open your mind to the possibility that there is an entire world out there that is just waiting for you to tap into it. I tell people all the time, the way that I look at expenses now is that our expenses are assets. Seriously, they're most underutilized assets to leverage to earn just this different form of currency in the form of credit card points and miles, where you can have just some unbelievable experiences with them. And so I love talking to the people who didn't even know that this was a thing, or maybe they've heard something about it or read something about it and just kind of wrote it off as either being too complicated for them, or maybe it wouldn't be, useful for them. Again, I think that so many of us, by the nature of our personal expenses or our business expenses, are sitting in this just amazing opportunity to be able to really tap into this whole world. And so specifically for those of you for whom this is a very new conversation, I just encourage you to think about whether or not you would just love to have more travel experiences, and just invite you to learn more about this world, because these communities where people like the two of us talk about points and travel, they're so supportive, they're so helpful, they're so informative. And again, what's waiting for you on the other side are just really incredible experiences for yourself, for your loved ones, for your family. And I just invite you to open up your brain to the possibility that this could be available to you too.
I'm with you. That's awesome. Yes. I love what you said, that our expenses are our best assets right now. Basically, that is true. It's true.
Yeah.
So if I want to work with you, I want to learn more, I want you to be my coach, where do I reach you? Where can I find you?
Okay. The easiest place to find me is on my website. It's very simple. It's just PointMeToFirstClass.com. When you go there, you have lots of different options. If you want to actually get in touch with me, you can contact me directly through that website. You can also learn more about the podcast there if you're interested in learning more about the podcast that we have. And also, if you're someone who really wants to learn how to do this, you want to dive into this world, and you don't want it to be a full-time job for you. You've got some other full-time jobs that are keeping your hands full, but you want to learn how to do this really easily, really simply, and honestly, from that perspective of how can you as a physician or a business owner really leverage your type of expenses to earn a lot of points and then be able to use them really strategically to travel. You can learn more about my online course that I run through my website. The course is called Points Made Easy, and it is specifically for high-income professionals, employed professionals, and business owners to learn the tools that are actually, I think, the most useful for people with our level of expenses in this world, so that you can really streamline learning how to do this, so that you can start getting to the fun part, which is booking those trips and traveling, and not the not so fun part for most people, which is the figuring out part. I have figured it all out for you. So if you want to learn how to do this yourself, then you are welcome to get on the waitlist to join the next enrollment of Points Made Easy, which is actually coming very soon in about a month or two. So get on the waitlist for that if you want to hear more about how you can become a points pro with very little energy, very little agony on your part of trying to teach this to yourself.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much for being with us. And hopefully we can take a trip together in
I would
first class
love that.
and visit the Lufthansa first class terminal there in Frankfurt.
That would be amazing.
You
You tell me
here.
where you want to go and we can start planning.
Let's go. Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
And that's our podcast for today. I hope that you can join us again and learn more things like we did today with Dr. Devon Gimble. Her podcast is actually Point Me to First Class, and her website is the same name.com. She also has a Facebook group called Point Me to First Class. I hope that you had a wonderful time. Please visit our website, maxallure.com, MAXALLURE. Our next cohort is coming soon for our Physician Entrepreneurs Development Program. It's a 6-month program, and I hope that you don't miss it. Thank you very much. Share the podcast with any friends, any family. Give us reviews, 5 stars. See you later. Thanks. Bye.
Please remember that Design is not providing specific financial, medical, or career advice. Our only intent is to stimulate your appetite for growth by sharing our experience and those of our speakers, coaches, and guests. Your personal growth and success will be unique to your circumstances and your hard work. We sincerely hope you enjoyed the show and look forward to seeing you next week.